By the time our baby was due, we were already fully prepared. Even the whole dowry, despite the prejudices, was bought. And not just the dowry. The maternity hospital, the doctor was carefully chosen. My husband made an agreement with everyone, almost with a parking guard near the hospital. Kidding, of course. We've been waiting for him for almost 10 years, and we've almost lost hope. The only person my husband couldn't agree with was me. For no reason would she agree to stay in the hospital for preservation, believing that houses and walls help. And I felt great, even the toxicosis didn't bother me much. My poor husband had to tremble for 9 months. But now our torments were coming to an end, the date of planned childbirth was set, a bag with necessary things was collected and all that. The day before, I was suddenly seized with vague anxiety, my heart ached, although I did not experience any pain or unpleasant sensations. Therefore, I decided to call a friend who has already had the good fortune to visit the maternity hospital 3 times, coming out with a lace bag. Tanyasha, tell me, is this the usual anxiety of an inexperienced woman in labor, or something else? I asked with a nervous laugh. And then I have this new. This has never happened. Quote, and what did you want? It would be more amazing if you were calm as a tank. Everyone is absolutely worried, nervous, and not just for the first time. I personally end for the 3rd time with fear, as if I was giving birth for the first time. But don't be afraid. Everything will be fine. Drink some warm milk at night and calm down. When was the delivery scheduled? Quote, yes, I'm going in 5 days, I said. Do you want me to come tomorrow? I'll bake your favorite Charlotte, Tanya asked. I want to. I smiled. Well, that's settled. I'll be there for tea. I kiss you. And I kiss you. Having calmed down, I went to bed. My husband was already snoring with the remote control in his hands, without having watched the movie. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, the anxiety returned. I woke up with the feeling that I had dreamed something bad. But I couldn't remember what exactly. I went to the kitchen to drink water when I felt a pain in the lower abdomen, and my panties began to get wet quickly from moisture. Quote, the waters are leaving. It was a whirlwind in my head. I should have listened to my husband and at least spent the last week in the hospital. As soon as possible, I returned to the bedroom and began to wake my husband. He did not immediately understand when he was asleep, and when it came, he began to gather himself surprisingly calmly and clearly. We won't wait for an ambulance, I'll take you myself. I'll get home faster than them, the husband said, hurriedly dressing. Then he helped me, grabbed my bag, and we were ready to go. Don't be afraid. He kissed me on the nose. I'll be in the lobby waiting. Everything will be fine. Quote, I will not describe the further turmoil, I will only say that soon I was hugging my precious son to my chest and considered myself the happiest woman in the world. When they took me to the ward, the nurse somehow looked guiltily and said, I'm sorry, but there is only the 13th of the single wards at the moment. So what? I was surprised. What's the difference? Is she in a normal condition? Yes, of course, the nurse spoke hurriedly, but I'm not superstitious. I love black cats, I'm not afraid of empty buckets, and 13 is generally my favorite number, if that's what you mean. The main thing is that the ward is comfortable and my son is nearby, that's all. Without saying anything, the nurse drove me to the ward and opened the door. It was clean and cozy inside, as cozy as a hospital can be. There was already a huge bouquet of my favorite roses on the nightstand. Smiling, I said my husband's name with tenderness. The little crib was next to mine. Soon they brought my baby too. Even though I spent a sleepless night and was terribly tired, I couldn't get enough of him. I couldn't believe that the long-awaited baby was finally here, next to me. It was only after lunch that I fell asleep. Again in the dream there was a feeling of anxiety, a feeling of some kind of danger. But I couldn't figure out which one. I tried to throw out the bad thoughts inspired by the dream from my head, especially since my husband came and a little later Tanya. They brought so much food that they couldn't eat it in a week. I don't want to hear anything, a friend was indignant, in response to my requests to leave exactly half. You need to feed your son. Besides, everything is very tasty and light. Look, chicken broth, steamed cutlets, and for dessert a Charlotte, which I promised. My husband brought a bunch of fruits and juices. In general, they left only when they admired the baby and forced me to eat a little. I lay down on the bed and took out my phone. Probably from already bursting with messages. So it is. Relatives, friends and colleagues hurried to congratulate, sent cute postcards. I have to answer and thank everyone, but first I'll call my mom. She worries anyway, even though her husband has already called her. In order not to wake my son, I went out into the hall next to the ward and sat in an easy chair by the window. There were already several women there. Someone, apparently, like me, accepted congratulations and answered. I dialed my mom, and in a low voice I told her everything. I kept silent only about my anxiety. I didn't want to scare in vain, because everything is fine, the birth was easy, the baby is healthy. One of the women who was sitting opposite me suddenly got up and came up to me. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation, and I want to warn you before trouble happens. You need to get out of that room." I looked at her dumbfounded. "What did you say? Why should I leave? Have you given birth after many years to a long-awaited child? Right? What is it?" the woman asked. "Well, yes," I replied. What does the ward have to do with it? "Let's go to the end of the corridor," the woman suggested, looking back at the others. We stepped aside and she told me incredible things. "This is the 4th time I've been here," the woman began her story. "We have 3 sons, and my husband really wanted a daughter. I had to take a chance, although my age is not young anymore. Thank God." She crossed herself, "The Lord heard our prayers. There's nothing more to ask for, just health." Quote, "So," she continued, "when I gave birth here for the 2nd time, an accident happened. One of the women had a baby die in her sleep. The child was very desirable, since she was no longer young for childbirth. She was approaching the age of 40. The baby died in his sleep, and the doctors did not know from what. I still remember how she sobbed, how hysterical she was. Then she seemed to calm down, or maybe they injected her with something. It was quiet at night, and in the morning they found her in the ward with her veins cut. The horror of what happened next. Her husband was a big boss, he arranged this here. They fired almost half of the maternity hospital, even the television came. Maybe you heard? 10 years ago it happened ! No, I muttered. We moved from another city 7 years ago. Well, then everything calmed down and began to be forgotten. The boss got married and even brought his wife to the same maternity hospital. He had enough conscience. She gave birth safely and soon forgot about it. And some time later, the child died again. What is strange is that the long-awaited boy died, as in that case, and what is even more interesting, the woman who gave birth said that at night she saw a white figure in the ward who was sitting near the baby's crib, singing something affectionately, like a lullaby, and then she got up, picked up the child in her arms and went to the door. The woman screamed, turned on the light, but saw no one. The child was sleeping peacefully in the crib. She decided that she had had a terrible dream, went back to bed and fell asleep. And in the morning I found my baby dead. This time there was no noise. The doctors said that he had a congenital disease and that they had warned her. It was true. A couple more years passed and the same case happened again. The boy who was long-awaited died again and in the same ward. Can you guess which one? Quote, the woman asked me. And again the mother of this child saw a ghost that takes her baby away. I stared at her in silence, digesting what I had heard. You mean it happened in my room? I asked. Yes. Exactly, in the 13th. And the first case in the other 2. I think you're in danger now, too. Or rather your child. You need to ask for another ward. Quote, but now there are no single rooms. And I want to be close to my child. And none of the staff told me anything about it. Of course, no one will say, why spoil your reputation? And it doesn't happen every day. You can write it off as a coincidence. It's up to you. I just wanted to warn you. The woman returned back to the hall and I went to my room, reflecting on what I had heard. On the one hand, well, what ghosts? I'm a modern, sane person and I don't believe in such nonsense. And on the other, the woman does not look like a privileged liar or a dreamer. She spoke calmly and confidently. Yes, and my disturbing dreams came to mind. I decided to go to the head of the department and ask for another ward. The manager turned out to be a pleasant woman of about 50. When she heard my request, she was surprised. Quote, what doesn't suit you? The ward is good, recently renovated. I hesitated, not knowing what to answer. Have you really heard about the ghost? She threw up her hands. Well, you're an adult and not a stupid-looking person. We have had such cases, I will not deny it. But I assure you, infant mortality in any maternity hospital happens, unfortunately. Ours is not the worst yet, but perhaps the best in the city. But it's not ghosts that are to blame for this, but either genetics, or a woman's careless attitude to her health, or another, quite scientific reason. And that poor crazy woman lost a baby because she took strong tranquilizers during pregnancy, another gave birth almost in old age for the first time. In general, the most ordinary things, no mysticism. In cancer hospitals, then there should be a ghost in each ward, people often die there, and did that woman really commit suicide? I asked. The manager frowned a little, but replied. Quote, it happened while I was on duty. She was the wife of a major local official. Her husband is much older, 15 years it seems, but she loved him. The guy was really prominent, personable, but rude. At first, they lived well. The young wife did not know refusal in anything, he carried them on his hands, gave gifts. But several years passed, and there was still no children. My husband began to show discontent, saying that I divorced the first one because she didn't want to give birth, and you seem to be infertile. Further worse. He began to appear at home less often. He returns tipsy and carries someone else's spirits for a kilometer. And good people reported that he had a young beautiful mistress, they say, will give birth to his child, and he and his wife will divorce. Nastya has completely lost her peace. Her name was Nastya. And the name suited her very well. Such a fragile, elegant blonde. She was probably already well over 30 years old, but she looked like a girl. In general, I got hooked on tranquilizers. And suddenly God had mercy and gave me a baby. Noticing my surprised look, the manager smiled: "Did you think that doctors are all atheists? No, sometimes you see enough of it here, except for the Immaculate Conception, that any doubts will disappear." Well, she gave birth to a boy and was over the moon with happiness. My husband, for joy, showered everyone with gifts here, even the nurses. I was working as an ordinary doctor then, and just everything happened on my shift. It was a difficult night. A woman with a difficult birth was brought by ambulance. They took a long time with her. Just lay down to take a nap as a nurse runs, talking to a patient from the 13th hysterical. I rushed there. I look, she's on the floor in a fit. The nurse shows me the crib with her eyes, and there the child is lying dead. My God. They gave her an injection and called a psychologist. The child was sent to the morgue for an autopsy. I don't remember now exactly the conclusion of the pathologist, but it was connected with taking strong drugs. When she came to her senses, the psychologist started a conversation with her. Well, I was present at that. I know all the details from here. It seems that we managed to bring her to her senses, calm her down. They informed her husband. He rushed over, threw a terrible scandal to the head doctor. The noise was all over the hospital. We didn't want to let him go to her, but can you keep him? I don't know what they were talking about, but only after he left, the poor thing opened her veins. Most likely, he knew about the drugs she was taking and blamed her for her son's death. That's the story. The other two cases have nothing to do with this. There were other reasons there. All this happened a long time ago. Many women were lying in front of you in this ward, and everything was fine. No ghosts bothered them. I hope I reassured you. But if you wish, I will move you to another ward tomorrow. Just 2 will be released. Today, alas, no. I can only offer a bed in a 5-bedroom. No, thank you, I refused. I'll spend the night in this one, and tomorrow we'll see. Well, that's nice. The manager was delighted. Don't worry. You'll be fine, I'm sure of it. I left the office completely calmed down. Well, yes, the story is a nightmare, but it is quite real. No mysticism. Alas, it happens. Everything is logically explicable. I will not go anywhere, and I will put all nonsense out of my head. With these thoughts, I fed my son and went to bed. At night I woke up from a quiet chant, and turning to my son's crib, I was numb with horror. A woman in a white dress with long, loose hair was sitting on a chair next to her. With a bandaged hand, she stroked my baby's head, humming something. The other hand lay on top of the blanket. She mutters softly, "My son, I'll take you away from here." I couldn't even move a finger in horror, as if I was petrified. But now the woman got up and bent over the child, intending to take him in her arms. I, having thrown off the stupor by an effort of will, spoke to her. "Nastya, wait. Don't do this." The woman turned to me and whispered, "I'll take my baby, you can't stop me. No one can interfere." "Stop," I exclaimed in despair. Nastya, this is not your child. I know everything, I feel sorry for you. But it's not your boy. And where is my son? She whispered. "Where is he, tell me? Or do you want to deceive me? Everyone is deceiving me, they don't tell me where he is." She whispered, shaking her head sadly. "Your son was taken away by your husband to be buried," I replied. "He's not here." The woman opened her eyes wide and incredulously. "Husband? Did he take it?" Yes, I exclaimed. Ask your husband, but please don't take my son." The woman moved away from the crib, looked around for a moment as if doubting, but then went to the door and passing through it, disappeared. And I jumped up and rushed to my son. Thank God he was alive. Sobbing, I sank down on the floor in front of the bed, but in my heart I knew that everything was fine. The danger has passed. In the morning, I still asked for another ward, and it was provided to me immediately after processing. The woman who told me this story, as it turned out, was discharged. I couldn't thank her. A few days later, my son and I were already at home. We are doing well, growing, gaining strength. The horror that I had to go through is gradually fading into the past. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my mom. I don't know why.